Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Leslie Sol Kim. I'm a writer and filmmaker. And today I had a really fun conversation about The Exorcist, the 1973 film directed by William Friedkin, with some really good friends of mine, Ethan Crota, Dom Bagnato, and Susie Moon. Susie, in particular, has a new film that she made called Darla in Space. It's a sci-fi comedy. It's absolutely hilarious. I've watched it, and it's been making big waves in film festivals. It'll be playing in Brooklyn, New York for the Bushwick Film Festival on Saturday, October 28th at 8 p.m. And there's also screening in LA for the Downtown LA Film Festival on Saturday, November 4th at 3:30 p.m. Don't miss your chance to see this film with a live audience. It's really great fun. Susie will be there with some of her crew and cast. Eric LaPlante, the director, will also be there. So please do check it out. I'll leave the links for the tickets in the description below, and we'll talk a little bit more about the film with Susie after our discussion about The Exorcist. So let's get to it. So I thought it would be fun to just kind of take a stroll down memory lane and think about how we were first exposed to this film. Do you guys remember like when you first watched it? Were you a kid? Did you think it was silly? Any general thoughts, guys? Dom, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I probably so I should say also I was brought up Catholic, which I do think affects your viewing of this film. I don't see how
Hmm.
it couldn't. But I grew up wanting, loving films and always wanted to sort of get the most out of them. So for me, for a horror movie, that was like the only way to watch it was I think I was maybe 12 years old. And
Mm.
the only way to watch it was to give myself the full experience, right? So I waited for everyone in my house to go to sleep, got the VHS, turned off all the lights, and forced myself to watch it alone in the basement because I was like, well, I want to give this film that everyone says is one of the scariest films of all time the best chance to actually be scary because it's
Hmm.
that's what you want to do, right? You don't want to go in cynical and be like, oh, I'm not going to be scared by this. What's in like, why are you watching a horror movie then, right? That's like going into a comedy and being like, I'm not going to laugh. Um, so I remember I watched it. I was in, yeah, I think I was about 12, and it scared the hell out of me. It was
Really?
definitely an
Well, at
experience.
12, I
Yeah, I
imagine, right?
was I was really scared, but I mean, I mentioned I was brought up Catholic because I also think like that affects your lens so much because it's like I think the horror in this film, at least especially when I was 12, for me, was that it was the same as like people say home invasion horror movies are scary because they could happen to you at any moment. And I almost felt like being a Catholic, I was like, oh wait, so I could be possessed by a demon at any moment. Like it was that real to me to think
Hmm.
like, this is something that could happen, especially because in the story, the little girl doesn't really do anything. It's not like a moral tale of like this person did X and therefore now she's possessed by a demon. Like there's maybe, she might play with a Ouija board or something like that, but still she never does anything negative that then like starts like incites this that she deserves in any way to be possessed by this demon. She's almost sort of ancillary to the entire plot in a way, and so for me, that just freaked me out because I was like, okay, well, this is a little girl in her bed, and now I'm about to like crawl up into my bed as a 12-year-old when I'm, at probably at that point like 1 in the morning. That was my experience, my first experience.
Wow, at 12. Must have been pretty intense.
Yeah, it was for sure.
What about you, Susie? Do you remember the first time you watched this film or came across it?
I I think it's that I remembered more classic scenes from it. The pea soup and kind of like the head turning, and I guess where it's like spoilers ahead, but um, I remember those. I don't ever remember being filled with terror, even though I did know about these scenes like at an early age. Um, Dominic, I really liked what you said about the fact that she didn't do anything. There was no like cause and effect. She did this and therefore she gets possessed. And so it's anybody's game right now. Yeah, it's like just a roll of the dice and suddenly you're possessed. That's something that I love, like the randomness of it and that being like truly terrifying. Um, as far as like the early stuff I remember, it was actually like that horrible like crucifix scene where she's like the, I think fuck me Jesus or something like that, and she's like impaling herself in all this blood, directly followed by Ellen, and it's like I remember that and it being like very shocking. That was horrific because of like so many layers of the salaciousness, but like horror revulsion, like I really like don't want to watch this anymore, like level. That was very horrifying early on. And then less so kind of like all of the other just purely violent things somehow. But yeah, just initial thoughts.
Mm. Yeah, that scene with the cross, yeah, that was very, very shocking to me too when I first saw it. It's a shocking scene now, I think, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
still was affected. Yeah,
Yeah.
even knowing what to expect.
So
I didn't
I
expect to be
believe
like, oh,
the actual line is "Let Jesus fuck you," right? That's the actual line.
that's it. Yes.
Yeah, crazy. Still such a
And
crazy
then,
line.
yeah, no, it was just all of it. I guess
The
too,
little
now
girl
that
and
I'm older and thinking about it,
yeah.
like it's thinking about Linda Blair being that age or however age she was
But it
really. And
wasn't
then,
so. So Dom, let's refer to the expert here. It wasn't Linda Blair, right? That was another actress playing the like the monster-fied version of
oh, really?
yeah. I
I
don't
don't
think
know about
it
that. It's she was definitely in a good amount of it. I don't know if for
but there
that
is another
specific
actress there,
scene.
right?
I don't know. It's definitely possible. I've never heard that. That doesn't mean it's not true, but I'm not aware
Okay,
of that.
maybe I'm imagining. I don't know because
I
I'm pretty sure I
I
heard
know
that there was
she
like
physically got injured with the bed shaking because of the apparatus. So I know she was in for that
mm,
part. So um, I don't know. It's interesting. Like that specific scene is interesting because in the book it's actually like even more um,
Like
like
profane, horrifying?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then in like the script version, I remember reading this. Um, there's actually like a note that he wrote, William Peter Blatty, because he wrote the book, but he also wrote the script that says like she, masturbates with the cross, but like which is below frame and will never be seen. Like he
Mm-hmm.
actually like went out of his way to put it in that note because he was like he seemed very aware of like the obscenity of it, and I think from everything I can gather, it was Friedkin pushing the sexuality into it as much as possible because his whole thing was like, well, it's the religion and the sex together that's kind of like so tantalizing to people. And I think William Peter Blatty was kind of against that. As far as I can tell, he was like
mm,
a pretty like genuinely religious dude, and so that's kind of the angle he was coming at it from. But yeah, we should let Ethan talk about his first
yeah.
time seeing.
Yes, please, Ethan. Sorry about that.
Oh no, no, that was interesting. I didn't know that about Blatty. So I became aware of this. What was it, like 2000 when they put out the version you've never seen,
The
or they
director's
put out
cut.
that like yeah, the extended version. I remember seeing the trailers for that, and I was like, not gonna watch that. I've never really been a big horror fan, and so not like as if like they're bad movies. They're just like very stressful and overwhelming to me. So I was like 16 in 2000. So yeah, I remember just being like, I'm not gonna watch that. And I guess it was until sometime within the last 10 years was the first time I saw it. I'm not sure like what year exactly, but I had a friend who was like sat me down and was like, you're gonna watch this now. Like this is happening now. And my main takeaway from it, the first time I watched it, was how upsetting I found I guess, the first two acts, and how like the exorcism stuff did not bother me. Like the scene I will never forget is when Linda Blair is getting that thing stuck in her neck at the doctor's office and the blood splurting out, and she's like in agony, and all of those like 70s era hospital machinery is like whirling around. I was like, I can't watch this. Like I was like, I need to look away. I can't look at this anymore. I think the idea of, especially a family member and especially a child, like being like ill and there being no answer for it, that's what really horrified me about the movie. So like the exorcism stuff is very cool to watch, and it's very well staged and very well executed. But I just remember being like, why didn't anybody tell me that this was so as upsetting as it was about the hospital stuff? I was like, I was not warned about this. This just came at me like a freight train. So, um, yeah, that was I swear, like that's the image I'll never forget is her doing all those, tests on her and just being like, this is awful. So that was not a very informed take, but that's really what I remember about it the most. But I did watch it again last week. And, I've actually been watching a lot of Friedkin recently, like not on purpose. It's just been happening, obviously, because he died. It is just it's an amazing looking movie. Like I guess I forget that he was no slouch when it came to shooting and staging and photographing locations. Like it's a great fall movie too. I guess I'd forgotten about that. That there's just like a lot of great foliage and yeah. So
Yeah, I just want to second that. For me, especially now watching it with daughters, like the the idea of the fear of the unknown of like something is wrong with the family member and that you can't do something about it, like it's the same fear, right? Whether she's possessed by a demon or she has something that doctors can't figure out, like that's the reality of it. And that scene with like the blood spurting out of the thing in her neck was like the one scene that turned my head for, even this last time when I watched it, I think yesterday, the day before, because I think it's Friedkin's way of sort of like reminding you almost, because those things are more real. So then you care more when like the demonic stuff happens to this child. Like it's like almost a reminder. It's like all of this is stuff that's happening to this person's body, right? And it makes it feel like intensely real. Um, I just yeah, I mean it's interesting that you mentioned too like the first two acts, because as I was thinking about this was sort of my like analytical brain this time, because at this point I've seen this so many times. And I was thinking to myself, like, I think let's put it out there. I think The Exorcist is one of the scariest movies of all time, right? But I was also thinking to myself as a creator of film, as a writer, as a director, if I got that script, I know in my bones I would have made it worse. And that was something that was so interesting to me, because I was thinking analytically, if you pick apart what happens in this movie, there's so much that I would have been like, I would have noted the hell out of that script, right? I would have been like, well, why does this happen? Why does that happen? What's the explanation for this? There's a lot of stuff that when you're watching the movie for the first or second time, you just blow by because you're so engrossed in it. But when you start watching it analytically after you've seen it however many times, you realize there's a lot of stuff that like is completely superfluous. And that obviously it's a great film. So I'm glad that it's in the film. But if I were making it, I would have probably taken a lot of that stuff out and made an inferior film. So that's kind of what I was like struggling with, and was really interesting to me in this most recent viewing was like, I mean, just by way of example, like the whole Iraq sequence for the entire beginning of the film is a lot for pretty much just all that really serves is that when you finally see the father at the end, it's not the first time you've seen him, right? But you could imagine any writing person being like, "Hey, you probably don't need that. Like, let's start the movie where the movie starts, right?" The desecration of the Mary statue in the church. Who does that, right? Like that is totally separate from anything else. And the last thing I'll say on this, because it relates to, I think I'm the only person who's read the book. There's a lot of stuff in the book. This is the sort of hot take that I'll give. I think the Exorcist film is better than the Exorcist book. And everyone always says the book is better than the film, but there's a very specific reason for that. The book takes a lot of time with red herrings. So the book, like every one of those medical tests, everyone, the servants, Carl, the director, Burke, every one of those people are in the book to give you as the reader, when something happens, something unexplainable or something terrible, it goes out of its way to give you, oh well, here's the possible non-supernatural reason that happened, or the person who did this, right? And for me, that is largely a waste of time, right? It's The Exorcist. You're going there, like the film doesn't really go out of its way to make you think, oh, maybe she's not really possessed. It does one or two things, but it's not really about that. And I think that's actually better and more interesting. But because of the remnants of that book, there's a lot of stuff in it that really also don't serve the film in any way, right? Like all of those things that are kind of like, why are these characters even here? They're not needed anymore. So I forgot why I was mentioning that, but I mean the first and second acts have a lot of that stuff where you're kind of like, there's a lot of interesting stuff that happens, so I'm going to keep going with it. But then if you watch it long enough and actually think about it, you're like, why the hell is that even in there? So,
That's really interesting. I mean, I disagree. I think Dom would have made a much better film. This is a young William Friedkin. He's what, 37 or 38 when he made this film. I wanna talk to Susie because she's just such a strong writer and a structure person. Like, what do you think, Susie, about what Dom said?
I actually have a follow-up question to what Dom said, which is to do with Friedkin's, I think, background as a documentary filmmaker and the possibility that his division into the acts is more like this is an extended snapshot. I'm not going to give you anything more, but here's another extended snapshot. And then like more of a linkage, this third act. There's something in talking about it with my husband last night. I was like, there's something kind of like improvisational, free flowing about everybody's dialogue and interaction. And I was like, that is documentary in its style. And I sort of like, once you let yourself get into it, I was totally fine with it. And it kind of like makes that intro piece land for me. Not like I'm tempted to call it like a prologue, but it isn't. It is in fact act one. And act two is more of like the development of Reagan and her mom and that relationship and getting to know mom's career and things like that. You're getting some investment into their lives and you like this, you're rooting for them as a mother and daughter. They seem to be doing well and you want them to continue. But then this happens and then we're into like the act three, which is kind of like the more famous part of it, I guess. But do you have any thoughts on early Friedkin's like documentary stuff being influential in not just Exorcist, but maybe like other early or later films? I don't actually know his work very well, but
no, I mean, I think that's a great point, and I actually like that's kind of was my point too. Is like it is kind of documentary in style. There's like this interesting cross cutting where it's just like smashes a scene from the hospital together with the scene from with the priest, and it's kind of just like the only purpose of the scenes is to give you more information, and so you care about the characters, as opposed to most narratives, it's you're getting a plot, right? And each scene precedes the next scene, and then it's a kind of linear progression of things, right? This film, if you watch it, is not that at all. It is these, like you said, these documentarian snapshots with the sole purpose of you feeling emotion for Father Karras and for the girl, right? And I mean, the cast is great, the direction is great, and that sort of style has what separates this film from other horror movies, which is you actually care about the characters, right? You have that emotional, and that's what I'm saying. I think everything Friedkin put in it serves that purpose. Whereas I would, with my analytical brain, would be kind of like, we're meandering too much. This does not serve the plot. This is too out there. And I would have taken out some of that stuff just for the nature of like pacing that you actually need to care about the characters. I think the documentary aspect is a really good, but it's the one thing I would say is like if you the prologue versus the first act thing. So classically the first act ends with the inciting incident, or the inciting incident will kick things off. I was trying to think what even is the inciting incident in The Exorcist. Like if you try to map The Exorcist to classical story structure, it's harder than it is for most films because usually that's such a basic thing to do that any of us could probably do it with like the snap of our fingers. But in terms of like structure and pacing also, if you think about like you said, all the scenes that a lot of us remember, the actual exorcism, you're talking about what is that, like an hour and 40 minutes into a 2-hour movie that stuff starts.
Yeah.
So really long first act, really long second act, but like what is the inciting incident even of The Exorcist?
But you don't think that's a problem, Dom? Because I have problems with that.
I don't think it's a problem because I think The Exorcist is one of the best horror movies ever. That's what I'm saying. Like, I think everything that we would map onto it. It's kind of like almost like an AI discussion, right? Like, I don't think AI is ever going to make The Exorcist because it's so messy and so meandering. It's art, right? There's scenes that would not even fly nowadays. Like when Father Karras looks to the bed and he's seeing his mother and it just transforms into the mother. Like,
That was
there's stuff
great.
that's stylistic, but that's stylistic. It's so not real, and it felt very 70s to me. There's also in those sequences crazy lighting changes that are just there because it makes the art better, right? All of a sudden, there's a sign where you look, a shot where you look up and Reagan is backlit. She's totally silhouetted, and there's like this strong light behind her, and she's up on the bed. Like, it's so stylistic and documentary in the same. Like, there's so much mashed in there that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it all comes together in a way that is very affecting
Hmm.
to me.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Let's actually talk about because I think in all movies, the first shot is one of the most important shots, obviously, right? Do you guys remember the first shot?
Oh, damn. Stand?
Huh?
I don't remember. I just watched it
Dom
yesterday.
remembers the first shot.
It's
Dom remembers, right?
Yeah.
What's the first
I
shot, Dom?
remember the sun, and I remember lots of
Yeah.
The sun,
lots of
and then
digging.
there's the Muslim call to prayer, and you can hear it, right?
Right.
I
Right.
think that's a really bold shot. And it also, I may or may not have spent all night watching every Exorcist film yesterday, which is the reason I'm like totally out of it right now. But it repeats in other movies, that shot. So in terms of like it's an iconic shot that other directors obviously felt some sort of connection to. So it's a bold shot. And I think
So is it like the Morning Star thing? The Rising of the Sun, Morning Star?
I suppose. I mean, what does the rising sun kind of mean? To you guys? I mean, it traditionally represents birth and life and God, and right across like many different cultures, right? And then you hear the prayer, and I don't know, it's a strong shot again that repeats. But I think Friedkin has a knack for capturing those big grand sort of images in his films. Even the last let me share my screen here. 'Cause I have those images. You guys see that? You guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's the first image. And even that last shot in the sequence with Marin facing off with the devil statue, they're pretty powerful, bold images. Um, so I'll give him credit for that. I just feel like I just feel like I didn't know about his past as a documentary filmmaker. That makes a lot of sense to me. Like, because that initial sequence to me, it feels cobbled together. Doesn't it feel that way to you? It feels like he didn't have a specific direction, and he was finding different shots to create like this eerie sort of tone. You guys think I'm like totally off about that?
I don't think it was
I
cobbled together. I think it was,
okay.
pretty purposeful.
Like, I mean, like
But
I just feel like a
It,
lot of the tools that I mean, a lot of the shot selection and his cinematography, I feel like they're sort of like parlor tricks. Like that woman with the carriage kind of rushing in to scare Friedkin, or that swordsmith, if you guys remember,
Oh, yeah.
the one eye. I'm like, okay, is that like does that evoke some sort of like eerie? I don't know. It just didn't seem. It seemed manufactured to me. It didn't seem organic to me.
Did it seem cheesy
Yeah,
a little bit?
yeah. It seemed cheesy. It was very long, like Dom mentioned. It was 10 minutes long in a film that's not even 2 hours long. And we, like Dom said, we don't learn a lot about anything. We don't learn a lot about Marin. We learned that he's old and he's sick and he's looking for something. And there's this like eerie sort of evil floating around the air. And that's how he that's how he chooses to convey that tone, right? Through kind of these kind of jump scares, and then the guy with one eye, and it's like, I don't know, it didn't really
There's
land for
also
me
like
personally.
with the guy with one eye, there's also like 2 or 3 statues that you see in shots directly before that, where there's also like one eye has eroded. So that's why I
Okay.
feel like it was like this, and also like this is planned, right? There isn't just a guy with one eye that they're capturing. It's it's I feel like I also feel like I read the book years and years ago, but there's a lot more of this type of stuff in the book.
Okay. Okay.
And so
Interesting.
it's to me, it's kind of like the whole mythology of like Pazuzu, who's like the demon in the book, which is essentially the devil, and like it all it has more purpose in the book. Um, but at the same time, that's not in the text of the film, but there's still this remnant. Like I remember when I watched it back, so when you watch it back and before they call in Father Marin, they're talking about getting somebody with experience. And they mentioned that like something like 12 years ago, he did this exorcism in Africa and it took however many months or whatever. And I'm
Right.
thinking to myself, so wait, the guy who was about to come to do the exorcism has a history of doing exorcisms, except when we got our introduction to him, we didn't see that. We saw him being an archaeologist in Iraq. So I'm like, for me, like again, this is how I would have made the film worse, because like the opening sequence in a modern day horror film would have been the end of that Africa exorcism, right? So that when you call the guy back at the end, you know, okay, he's got experience doing this, he's got a bad heart from it, he's taking these nitroglycerin pills. That's a much more direct, logical thing to open the film with. I'm kind of glad that's not what we saw though, right? So it's kind of like for me, that's where the interesting, like engaging with the film and its messiness and why it still works, even though it's so messy.
Mm.
Like it's almost like if you went through and took out all the stuff that's messy, what would be left? And would it still work? I don't know.
So you guys, so you and Dom and Susie kind of agree that this unorthodox kind of ensemble type of like structure with Marin, and then going to Georgetown, and then meeting Reagan, and then seeing slivers of like Damien Karras's life. You think that is an effective sort of structure for this particular film?
I actually don't know what the aim was, if I'm honest. For as much as like I'm aware that there kind of should be tension, I don't know that I ever felt it. I have to disagree with Dom's thing about like, well, I mean, you didn't say it like this, but I think we know from the get that it's a demon possession. The devil possesses a small girl, and we know it all throughout the mother's like attempts to get an actual medical diagnosis. So there's no tension for me there. And in fact, when we're into Act 3, where she hires the priest, it's like, well, good. There's no tension there either. He's like, yeah, I don't know for a second, but then we know he's on board directly. And then it just turns into the Act 3 of the exorcism, where I feel like because of the Max von Sydow nitroglycerin repeatedly, that we're already told he's going to die for the most part. So there was no tension there for me either. And then when she's all better at the end, I was like, yeah, I mean, that's what you set me up to expect. So I feel okay. But as far as like fulfillment of like for myself in a story, I'm not really sure. I think it's a work of art, but I didn't kind of like feel emotional toward it, if that makes sense. I think I went off the rails there from the question.
No, no, no. Yeah, no, that's good. What about you,
That's
Ethan? Like, coming from
Um,
like someone who's only watched it twice,
yeah.
would love to hear kind of your thoughts about it. You didn't seem to, just from your intro, you didn't seem to really connect too much with the piece in general.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting like Friedkin dilemma that I have. And so not to make this like a sidebar, but like over the past month, I watched Cruising to Live and Die in LA, and this movie I'd never heard of called Rampage that he made in like the early 90s about the I think he was called the Vampire Killer. Um he was someone who went on like a little murder spree and like took people's organs and drank their blood, and Friedkin made this really bizarre like it's a really, I'm going off on a tangent here, but he made this really bizarre movie that's like totally ideologically like all over the place, because it's about like here's this horrible killer who should be put to death, but like the system is designed to send him to these coddling mental institutions where he'll be taken care of and then let back out into the street. And it's a really, it's like I guess what I'm trying to say with all this is like I don't think Friedkin's movies make any logical sense if you think about them. But what I remember from them, what I take from them, are like, and not to sound like a Gen Zer, but like vibes, right? Like it's all about like mood and um like images, sort of. So to me, like The Exorcist is always so interesting because I'm like, a lot of this movie is almost a domestic drama, and it's so fascinating that for a horror movie, it's about adults and it's about like adult concerns. It's not a bunch of teenagers getting murdered in the woods one by one, which those are fine too, but it's really like it's like watching this woman go to work. Ellen Burst, Chris McNeil, I think that's her name. Watching her just like go to her job every day and take care of a daughter. It's like fascinating in that regard because it's not what you expect from a horror movie. So I guess to somehow wrap this all up, it works for me in that, like, in the context of Friedkin's movies, because I'm like, I don't think he's the most coherent filmmaker, but that's okay, because the images are so memorable. I mean, it's hard for me to think of like any of his classic films and not instantly recall a shot or a scene or
Mm.
something that just like really shook me the first time I saw it. But in terms of like the narrative and and the writing, it's not that it's bad. It's just it might not be at the same level. So I'm team like it doesn't necessarily grab me emotionally, but I'm also okay with that, and it still
Just even that
works.
shot behind you, Ethan, like iconic shot.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
that
yeah.
shot.
And there
Like
and
it's the
the,
shot.
like, right, right, and like something like that happens every like 10 seconds in The Exorcist. So, and not this movie's also been like parodied to death, and I think the fact that a lot of the images that have been parodied, like the head spinning, still freak you out, speaks to the power of that. It hasn't been diluted or watered down because it's been, mocked so many times.
But yeah, I mean that kind of brings me to my question for you, because like a lot of the stuff that we see in this film, as much as I'm up talking the direction of it all, right? Now I think it's amazing everything he did. A lot of the stuff is so over the top that for me, I was frustrated watching it because the film still insists that there's a possibility that there's a natural explanation for some of the stuff. Whereas what we're visually seeing, there's no evidence, right? Like even the very first thing with the Ouija board, like I feel like the mom is standing right there and neither of them are touching it and the thing just flies over. And it's like, why does that happen? And it just passes and nobody's, and then it's like, it just gets worse and worse, right? Like when the bed is shaking, like in the book that's described, and you would imagine like a rumble or something that you could be like, well, maybe, but like that bed is, you know, jumping around. There's no possible way that there's any natural explanation for any of this. Yet there's still another like 45 minutes of people being like, well, maybe, you know, and again, this goes back to kind of the book. Like you get the doctor saying, like, well, the 90-pound mother can lift a bus off of her child in an adrenaline surge or whatever. In the book, because as you're a reader, you're imagining some of the stuff is sort of equivalent to that stuff, right? But visually, what we're seeing, including this head spin, right? This 360 degree, there is no logical physical explanation for a lot of the stuff that we're actually seeing. And so that there is like you were saying, there is no real tension there in a mystery of, is she possessed or not? The one question that they throw in there, which is sort of a remnant from the book, is when the priest gives regular tap water and she sort of reacts to that. And so that's like the one thing that they give you within the film version that's like, well, maybe there is something psychological going on here, but for the most part, like 95% is telling you something supernatural is happening here. She's possessed. So for me, that's a little bit of a failure. Again, it's not a total failure because some of those images are the ones that we're talking about 50 years later that are stuck in our brains. But in terms of like a narrative, the failure that is that people could potentially still really be genuinely believing there's another explanation for this.
I actually have a question to go off on that. Because like I think Friedkin's last movie before this Showtime thing he just put out was a documentary called The Devil and Father something or other. And I think it was supposed to be about the real case that this was based on. So my question is like I feel like this movie is about a crisis of faith, right? With Merrick and I mean maybe
Karis,
Marin,
with
but
Karis, yeah.
Karis, sorry. Yeah, again, knew it sort of new for me. So does Friedkin believe in any of that, or because I feel like he would in when he was alive he would defend like, oh, this was all based on a real event that happened. This was based on a real exorcism. But I'm and going off what you said, I'm like when you watch the movie, sometimes I'm like, yeah, the movie is telegraphing that this is an exorcism, but I'm like, Friedkin seems like a provocateur in a lot of ways, so I'm confused as to what he thinks, and I'm wondering if anyone has any like clarity on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I have that same question. Like I said, I know from reading some stuff that William Peter Blatty was like a devout Catholic, and I know he was writing this as like this is the truth of what happens, like demons and that like possess people. If I had to guess, I would say Friedkin's a little bit more cynical than that, but I actually don't have any. Like I've never read. I don't know, but it's a good question. Um, it, Yeah, but I do agree that it's about a crisis of faith, right? Which is also really interesting, right? The sort of if there is a protagonist in this movie, if again we're talking about like the lack of structure and the confusingness of like if there even is a protagonist in this
Yeah,
film,
another big
it's
problem for me.
Karis, right? But it's Karis because he's the only one who grows, right? He has a crisis of faith by the end. He's forced to believe because he's confronted with it, and he's forced to basically give himself up to save this girl. But isn't
I totally
I
agree that
mean,
it is
isn't
Karras, and he has the most
yeah,
compelling
that's
story
so
for
weird.
sure. But we don't spend a lot of time with him because he opted for this structure, like where like we spent 10 minutes with Marin in the beginning, and then we spent like 20 minutes with the hospital thing, and then we finally get to like the actual story, which is Karras. Like I just feel like it just makes me wonder like what would have happened if we followed Karras, and it would have had a real like structure there instead of like going back and forth and it being a bit of a mess. I wonder like if that would outweigh like the pros would outweigh the cons there. You know what I mean? Like as opposed to having the structure the way that it
Well,
is.
yeah, like to your point about not following Karis, if we're saying we're all agreeing Karis is pretty much the protagonist or as close to him as we're going to get, we see a whole scene with his mother, and then his mother passes away, and we don't even get that scene. We learn about it in passing at the dinner party or something that his mother passed away a few nights ago. So it's like, what? Like it's just so strange. Like it's so weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think I think Friedkin doesn't have the real wherewithal or the screenwriter's mentality here. I do think that his filmmaking style really informs all of his shot selection and his editing choices. And so like I really wanted to connect with Karras. Like that's who I care about the most in the story. Um, I feel like the scariest part of the story is that Karras couldn't take care of his mom, right? So she went to this mental hospital, and thereafter she died. And that's the most, I don't know, that's the most, I felt the most connection with him. And I, you know, we only spend like a few scenes with him. So I don't know. It just didn't land for me like I thought it should. I don't know.
I don't know what that's all supposed to mean. You know what I mean? Because like for all of the deliberate choices that are made, they're incredibly deliberate. I kind of don't know what it adds up to. What is it that Friedkin's trying to say with it, with the structure even?
I think
I'm not sure.
I think you're saying the same thing Zoll's saying, which, and it goes back to the documentary thing. I feel like Friedkin's approach is to just think of the most interesting scenes that he can, and those are the ones he shoots. And he doesn't
Yeah.
give you the scenes in between, even if they're necessary for the structure, if he thinks they're boring. So like, you know, seeing a
you know,
scene
that
of
reminds me of
his mother
the
dying,
death,
like,
right?
he just takes it out.
What's his name? The director.
Burke, the director.
Burke, right. We
Burke.
don't see
He
Burke
just,
dying
yeah.
either. Right. Another kind
No.
of missed opportunity there. I don't know.
Right.
Because it would have been an interesting
Right.
scene. Because
And
he's an
again, though,
interesting
that's
character.
like, well, that's a remnant from the book. Like, there's so much stuff that, like, so if you recall, the very first thing that happens that's like creepy in the movie is Chris McNeil in the house says, "Oh, I think we have rats in the attic," right? Because there's this sound coming from the attic, and then she tells Carl, her one of her like assistants, servants, or whatever, to get traps and stuff. And then Burke at the dinner party, he kind of like insinuates that he says he's Swiss, but he's really a German Nazi who's hiding. And so there's this whole other red herring plot line in the book, at least towards the beginning, where you think that potentially Carl is like sneaking around doing things to this 12-year-old girl, and that is sort of like the you know, that's one of the things, one of the explanations is like, you know, and when the cross shows up, they're like all these questions like, well, you know, are these people religious? Did they put the cross in her room? You know, there's the desecration at the church, like who's doing that? The detective comes around and thinks it's like a human person doing some stuff, right? So there's all these storylines, and then Burke is a bigger character as well. But because none of that is in the text of the film, because he just cuts out those scenes, it makes it more confusing, but at the same time, like I said, we're there to see The Exorcist. So I don't really want to see those scenes either. I don't want to see the scene about like, oh, maybe this is a film about Carl, you know, molesting or, you know, abusing this girl and causing psychological damage. Like, not only do I not want to see that movie, I don't want you to take up my time thinking that that might be the case, because no one's really going to think it, because I just saw the Ouija board thing fling across the room, right? So it's like this weird, the movie is so different from the book, and it's so much less logical, but it's also so much more entertaining. It's so bizarre.
I like the structure. It is what it is. You know what I mean? It's like you can't unwatch it the way it is. So I like that it's out there. I like that I have questions about it. I even like that I won't ever get answers. It's kind of like I felt kind of similar after watching Uncle Boonmee and His Past Lives or something like that, the Thai ghost story, where you kind of understand what the story is. It's about a family that's grieving, and through their grieving, they bring across the recently dead. And they're not like ghosts that are treated in any sort of Western sense. They're just sort of, they're expected, and here they are now. And there are big chunks of it where we depart from what seems to be the like main thread into like a fable of this princess that gets caught up in a pond and ends up removing all of her jewelry and donating it to the fish. And it's like, oh, okay, you're just kind of trying to thread together what all of this means just because of the sequence of images that were shown. And I don't mind that. You know, I don't know what it means. So there's still that kind of hollow feeling. That's just my experience. Nothing change it at this point. But I don't mind it. You know, it's not something I wonder, and I think that's what art does. It's like it kind of like makes you question a whole bunch of stuff. I like that what Dom and Ethan, and I think Sol too, you were saying about like the kind of the realness of the actual demon possession, I kind of imagined, until you guys said something, that it was like plain. There is an exorcism because a demon that we've seen in like the first few shots has now like entered this child. There is no question. But there's something about like your all's conversation where it made me think the stylized aspect of those exorcism scenes could be argued to be like, this is the heightened reality. This is an interpretational possession. And this is what we're seeing. This is not the documentary facts of, say, like what I showed you before. This is purely heightened and my speculation. So at the end of it, what we have is dead Father Karras. That's all we got. Because Reagan doesn't remember, you know what I mean? Like everybody else is dead. So this is all interesting. Is it easier for us to think that it's actual demon possession than a prepubescent girl saying these truly demonic, horrible things? I kind of prefer to believe it was demon possession, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Is that the reality, though? Is that like a question that we're supposed to be asking ourselves? I don't know. I am now, though.
Yeah,
those are
that never occurred to me, and now the movie might be a little more interesting. So definitely taking something away. But something that just came to mind was, and Sol, you mentioned having watched every subsequent Exorcist movie. I think something though that you have to give this movie some credit for, at least, is that it's the only Exorcist movie that works like as well as it does, and the fact that it's been impossible to recreate the weird alchemy of this movie
I would agree. Yeah, the
does
other movies
say
are
does attest, and they're interesting, and they have, you know, moments and like threads running through them where you're like, well, this is like on a weird wavelength, but none of them are like entirely successful in the way that this movie was, not only financially but just like the way it like got to culture, and it's stuck in the culture, and it's like still relevant 50 years later. Or yeah, are we there yet? I don't know. Yeah. However long it's been. um that's an interesting like component to the messiness, I think, is the fact that I think this movie just goes for it. And the sequels, from what I remember, from what I've seen, are like much more into explanations and much more into trying to like crack and solve things. And yeah, this movie just, and that might be one of the reasons why it's so powerful, or why it lingered as long as it did, because it doesn't, solve that stuff for people.
mm,
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I've seen all the sequels over the years. I don't really remember much of any of them. But I do get the feeling that it's more like explanation, more logical, more stuff. And so that's like, again, like that's like the lesson, right? Is like this is this messy thing that's illogical, but it's such a crazy experience that it's still so affecting. Um, it's kind of amazing to me. Um, and like I said, there, part of that, some of that is negative too, though, right? Some like the way they achieved some of that stuff, some of the stuff they did on set. Um, like that, again, it was 1973 that it came out. So when you see their breath in that room during the exorcism, that's because they pumped air conditioning, and it was negative 20 degrees in that room when they were filming that. Um, when they're thrashing about, I think both Ellen Burstyn and Linda Blair were injured through because of different like apparatus. There's a lot of like, or even just psychologically, like the torment that a young actress had to go through to do those things. Like I think the creation of this film, there was a good amount of like torment built into it. So maybe it's almost like that is what we're seeing on screen and feeling in a way. I don't know.
Hello, The Shining,
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
lightning in a
I was,
bottle.
I think,
I was,
yeah,
I
The
wonder.
Shining
I
is like
wonder if
less successful, I think.
yeah, definitely. I wonder if all of that shock stuff is necessary though, because like the tone in itself is already unsettled. Like, so this is what I mean by like the different parlor trick studies is like the head turning thing, the projectile vomiting, and I wonder what the Exorcist would have been like if it didn't have all of those you know um special effects, and I don't know. I feel like it might have been like a more organic sort of. I don't know.
I feel like we wouldn't have. I feel like we wouldn't be talking about it today, though. I think it's hard for any of us. No one was around, but I think people seeing that, the profanity of that, and those effects in 1973, like that, the reactions to that. I mean, there's all these stories about the people literally fainting and things like that. Like their minds were so blown, and those images were so burned into their
Yeah,
brains and are
I
now burned into the
agree.
culture that I think if it was a
But
more subtle film, it wouldn't be.
I
what
also
it
feel
is.
like, yeah, no, you're totally right. And again, like I think Friedkin does such a good job at capturing those images. But like I feel like part of the reason why it's so popular is particularly because of those images and not because of the story or your connection to anything. I don't know.
Yeah,
So I don't know.
I agree.
I felt a bit hollow when I was like rewatching it. I just didn't. I don't know. I didn't feel a sort of connection with it, except for Karras, really, and his mom.
I just wanted to add something. Sorry, really quickly. This movie was released around Christmas,
Yeah,
right? Or like sometime in December, which I
yeah.
I
think
think
is
so. Yeah.
so beautifully perverse that I applaud them for that. Such
I
a
also have
great
heard.
idea.
I haven't been able to like find a source on this, but I've heard that in the marketing, at least in like, my mom was in like Brooklyn around this time, like in the marketing, they actually had people dressed up like priests, like walking the lobbies of the theaters just to get people like in the mindset that this was like, because they had people believing all sorts of things about like, you could potentially get possessed just by watching this movie, and that, like there was, rumors, and it was 1973, right? I mean, many, many, many years later, Blair Witch Project came out, and there were people going thinking that was a real found footage film. So like the naivete can't be underestimated of the 70s. And no one had ever seen anything like this before. And like I'll throw out an unpopular opinion, but it made me think about this the last time when I watched it more recently. The original Star Wars film. I am not a huge fan of the Star Wars franchise,
Oh,
and when I
Ethan.
watch it now, when I watch it now, I had a similar feeling to watching the original Exorcist, which was this must have blown people's minds when they watched this movie, right? But when you look at it and the structure and the story, like it does less for me today than the Exorcist does for me today in terms of like storytelling. But I don't necessarily like to Susie's point, like that's okay, right? It was an experience. It was an experience we all had. It was an experience that literally affected our culture in a way that nobody can do on purpose, right? It just happens. So that's something to sort of play with, right? Like these images, the shock value, what people experienced, what he created, um, still less, in spite of the fact that all of us are sitting here being like, story wise, it doesn't really do that much for me, and I don't really get it. Like that's pretty powerful.
It is. I agree.
Performances were really shocking. They were so good.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I mean,
Definitely.
they're all hard hitters at this point, but it's kind of like still, wow. I'm surprised to hear about that Ellen Burstyn thing you were like somebody was saying, difficulty with Friedkin or something.
Yeah, I mean, supposedly there's a scene where she's in like a harness, and she gets like, I think Reagan like slaps her or pushes her or whatever, and she gets thrown back,
Right.
and supposedly like she kind of was worried about it, and Friedkin had said to her like, don't worry, like we're just going to do it a little bit, it'll be fine. And then he told the stunt person like, pull it as hard as you can. So he pulled it as hard as he could, and she flew across the room, and she actually like bruised or broke her coccyx bone. And
Totally like
supposedly, because who
illegal
knows
like nonsense
right, but
that he
like
did.
supposedly when she yelps, you see her yelp in the film when she hits the floor, and supposedly like that's real pain. Um, so there's a lot of
Yeah,
that
that's
stuff that's just
problematic. Like, come on,
but that
man.
was his
It's a
persona, right? He was his thing was being no nonsense and being like he even spoke out about all the other exorcists. I remember hearing him say like, yeah, every other version of the Exorcist is like you can forget that they even exist. Like they're like so he
he
definitely did
was
not mince words.
I feel like I still feel like he was a young guy running around trying to figure out what the cool shots are. Like in the beginning, do you guys remember the boy that's running barefoot to tell Marin about what they found Like, yeah, I'm gonna shoot this kid. He's gonna be running barefoot, and I'm gonna get married through this kid's leg. It's gonna be awesome. Like that. I feel like that's the kind of
He felt
person
like a
that he.
checklist. Yeah,
Yeah,
he
yeah, and
did
that, and then
it.
in the statue, and then Marin, and then the dirt, and it's gonna be great. Like I can just hear him saying that, and like I don't know, man. I don't think that that's impressive. I don't know.
It's so interesting though that like, because I feel like as a filmmaker, like that's what I want. I want to push myself to do more of that. Like I've gone so far in the weeds, like literally, like I've gone so far into the weeds of like writing something that is like bulletproof that I feel like, okay, I need to step back and just be like, but what's freaking cool and entertaining? Like what's the shot here that's just visually going to be amazing? Like
You
take a
know what?
little bit of that and
Like
put it
those
in
are the most
there.
successful movies, you know? Like they are.
But
They are.
I don't mean for spectacle alone, right? I just mean like pushing yourself to visualize something that is even better than like the way that you I don't know. I just feel like I 100% agree with you when you say he's just a dude. Half this movie, he's just a dude sitting back being like, what's a cool shot? But like those shots are the reason we're sitting here talking about this movie right now. So that's kind of
Yeah.
amazing. It's not the
Yeah.
script. It's not the storytelling.
Have you read the script? Yeah.
So I read the script because my older brother also went to NYU, and I don't know if you all remember pre-internet PDF days. There used to be those guys who would sell like the bootleg, the
Oh,
Oh
tables, and
yeah.
they'd sell like the
Yeah.
printed. So like one
For sure.
Christmas, he bought me the Goodfellas script and the Exorcist script,
Uh,
and like when I was in high school and I read them, um, and like that book and that script as a piece of literature and as a screenplay are not going to be talked about 50 years later. Um, the movie is. And so like where is the distinction there? Like those visuals, that powerful, the acting, the performances, like the sum of all its parts is not as good as the parts, but the parts are good enough that they're still burned into our brains, right? So that's like kind of amazing. Like I think any of us, at least let me speak for myself, if I can make a film where there's one 3-minute sequence that is burned into someone's brains 50 years from now, I'm going to count that a success, even if
mm,
it's a meandering, nonsensical, like senile thing otherwise.
Yeah.
And so it's like kind of a reminder to myself to be like, hey, go for that too.
so what you're saying is
Uh,
we should all give up the writing that we're passionate about and go make Saw 15, right?
no, that's a great point, right? Saw is not The Exorcist. You know why? Because Saw doesn't make you care about the characters. Saw is a classical, crappy horror movie where you're rooting for the killer in a way. Maybe not the first Saw, right? The first Saw had some mystery elements. But my point is that's the distinction. Friedkin and Blatty go out of their way to make you care about Reagan. When you see Reagan as just a regular little girl, you immediately, they have 30 seconds in that mother-daughter relationship, and you immediately care about their relationship. You really like, you want this girl to be okay. And they take the time to do that.
That's kind of
Most crappy
annoying.
horror movies. Really? See, that's yeah. You have no. If you think that she's annoying before she's possessed, you have no chance of liking this movie. But my point is, like,
Yeah.
everyone knows the tropes of like the slasher, where it's like the characters are not, they're archetypes, and you're just waiting for them to be killed in interesting ways. That's a totally different thing. I mean, this movie was the first horror film ever nominated for an Oscar, right? For a reason, because it's a serious. It takes itself deadly serious, right? And you do care about the characters and the performances. It's not a schlock fest where it's about like, hey, what's the coolest thing what's the superpower that girl is going to have now that she's a demon, and what's the craziest thing that he can do? So that's a big distinction.
Wow, we've been talking for an hour now. Any kind of closing thoughts, guys, before we briefly talk about Susie's film and get on our way?
Any of you guys watch Teaching Mrs. Tingle when one of the characters does a really good impression of the Jimmy, why did you do this to me?
Oh
Have you seen
no,
that? It's
That
so
does
good.
I
that
haven't.
does sound
that
familiar.
mom is so
I
so adorable.
Yes, wonderful.
I
And like
Yeah.
her impression is just
Well,
beautiful.
more
man.
importantly, have any of you ever seen Repossessed? The actual
What?
parody that So Linda Blair made a film called Repossessed, which is an actual direct parody that she starred in. And
Wow.
like, just to give you an
Nice.
example, there's a part where you look at her, it's like a shot and angle down on her, and she turns into an ice cream cone, and she's yelling, "Lick me, lick me, lick me."
Oh
That's
dear.
like the level. That's like the level. It's like a Leslie Nielsen type, like
Ooh,
Hmm.
spoof parody, but it's worth watching if you just watch The Exorcist because it's Linda Blair and it's definitely worth watching.
I
The
might.
pea soup is amped up even more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the last thing I wanted to say about this is, so I think The Exorcist, one of the best, scariest horror movies of all time. I think
Nah.
psychological horror, right? But I do think there's a psychological horror film that is more effective and better and potentially scarier than this, which came out 5 years earlier, which is Rosemary's Baby. And Rosemary's Baby is all of the things we're talking about, right? Logical, methodical, you know, human based, motivated. Still, if you think about it, a similar, right? You're talking about a devil and a woman and, vulnerability, things like that. So for me, they came out close enough and their themes are close enough that it'd be interesting for people who like The Exorcist, especially, to go, because I think more people have seen The Exorcist than have seen Rosemary's Baby, even though Rosemary's Baby is also a classic and everyone knows it. But I mean, I think Rosemary's Baby is a more effective film. I think it leaves you with a lot more to think about and feeling a lot more sort of uneasy about life. So that's just sort of like thinking about how I would frame this and where I would kind of rank it. Like Rosemary's Baby, popped into my head, and I just wanted to mention that
It's a
as
different
something.
kind of scary to me. Rosemary's Baby has something that I really love, which is just like embracing the uncanny. Like the
Mm-hmm,
shot choices and the face choices are all like, where am
mm-hmm,
I? Whereas your, Exorcist is a different style of
mm-hmm,
creep. But I'm way into the uncanny.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is. You're right. It is totally different. But I just like I made a list of like 30 scary horror films years ago, and I looked back at it before this, and for in terms of like psychological supernatural horror, Rosemary's Baby was like the top one for me, and I was thinking like I still stand by that over The Exorcist. Um,
Cool. Anything you want to say, Ethan?
And I want to rewatch Rosemary's Baby because that's another one I've only seen once, and it's been a while. So damn. Um, I guess yeah. I last thing, and I don't want to get too like doom and gloom about modern filmmaking because that's like a very easy target to hit. But thinking about all the stuff Friedkin did and like how he was a genuine lunatic and probably not the nicest person on the planet. Um, and it's a privilege afforded someone like him. Um, you kind of miss the lunatic director a little bit. I mean, you don't want them to be abusive, but it's like you just think of how many movies, and I mean, look at this new Exorcist. I mean, it's just the playing it safe aspect of modern filmmaking is, I think, what makes this Exorcist like an oasis in the desert, where you're like, risks are being taken. There's a genuine kind of like lunatic energy going on here. And it's I can't tell anymore if my brain has just been so fried because like I'll watch something like Home Alone, which was a movie I was a fan of as a kid, but then like grew to sort of slowly hate as time went on because I think it's like really saccharine and really like kind of gross about how it manipulates you. Granted, that's the point, but that was my like film school take on that movie. And I watch it now and I'm like, oh man, this is shot on film. They're like in real locations. Like it's lit really well. Like you can see the images. They're holding on them for a little bit. And like that's where I'm like, I don't want to get too nostalgic for stuff like that, but I do think The Exorcist over something like say Home Alone has this, energy to it that you have, I don't know, I don't want to say you have to be someone like his, you have to be like you have to be evil to your actors to accomplish that because I don't want that to be true, and I know it's not true because other horror movies have been made that are as scary, and that didn't happen.
So
I think
two things. One, Home Alone, love it, and Chris Columbus, NYU alum. But two, like I think we got to push that narrative out. Like the whole toxic director thing. There's plenty of us nice people who deserve a chance to make our own films. Like if somebody is an asshole, it's okay to be like, you know what, you don't get to make films anymore. There's plenty of other people to let
yeah.
go.
Oh yeah. I agree. I'm just also like, but yeah, like you said, like would this movie be what it is without that Friedkin
Yeah,
je ne
no,
sais quoi? But
yeah,
and that's Ellen Burstyn's back being broken is not worth a
right.
movie.
No,
I know what you're saying.
absolutely
I know what you're
not.
saying.
That's so messed up.
Yeah, and I think she said she was like permanently injured because of that.
Oh my
Because,
goodness.
like, permanently messed up. I don't.
That's so
I
terrible.
think either I heard that or I'm not sure. But in any event, yeah, I'm not. I don't want to be defending toxic behavior, but I will say that just watching movies like this is refreshing in like modern. I don't know. I just it's pretty dire out there, and yeah, this was a nice revisit, I'll say.
Home Alone 2, best horror film of all time. I'll stand by it.
No, what I used to tell people as my like really annoying hot take was to tell them to watch Koreeda's Nobody Knows. Has anyone here seen that Japanese film about 4 kids who are left alone?
Yes.
And it's like
Yes.
absolutely devastating and heartbreaking. It's like more realistic. I was
Yeah.
always like, you should watch that instead of Home Alone, which is total nonsense. But that's how I used to be annoying to people. But I've given up on that.
It reminded me, this is so random, but it reminded me so much of like this series called Homecoming by Cynthia Voigt, about like 4 basically homeless children that have to fend for themselves as they like walk and hitchhike their way to like what they assume to be a grandmother's house. Anyway, this is like totally off topic here, but there's something so similar to that. It was very, it filled me with anxiety, that one. Yeah.
Cool. This was a lot of fun. Susie, do you want to just touch on your film, what it's about, and how much fun it is?
Well, it's called Darla in Space, and it's about Darla who learns that she owes $350,000 in taxes, largely due to something her mother did. And around the same time, she happens upon a sentient kombucha SCOBY, which, if you don't know what those are, like the kind of yeast masses that, well, they can be anywhere from like this to much larger commercially, I guess. And it has this uncanny talent of granting orgasms, like mind-blowing ones. And so Darla with her debt and Mother with this ability kind of team up and try to raise the money to pay off the debt. Mother, in exchange, wants to go to space, and Darla promises that she can help.
Sounds amazing.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, that's the energy I was talking about. That sounds awesome.
Didn't have to break anyone's back to make it.
No.
Yeah, it was actually a really great learning experience. It was, I have to say, like, probably more valuable than my time at NYU, although one could argue that I would never have met Eric without NYU. And I developed, I think, my screenwriting brain through NYU. So it's like not possible to untangle those two. But it was an education. It's great. Yeah, and it's playing at a couple festivals.
Yep, the
in
Bushwick
New York, Brooklyn
Film Festival,
right?
Susie, Saturday, October 28th at 8 p.m.
That's right. Yeah.
And LA, Downtown LA Film Festival.
Yeah, the DTLA Film Festival on November 4th. It's at 3:30, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen the film
in downtown.
It's so much fun. Yeah, I'm gonna put all of the stuff in the links and stuff in the description. Maybe the 3 people watching may buy tickets. Hopefully a lot more, but it really is so much fun, and I think Eric did such a great job, um, just really
Oh,
pulling
yeah.
everything together, because like it's your first feature, right, Susie, and his first feature as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
super impressive for like a first feature. I think it's funny in all like the right ways, and the script is super strong, and the acting is really really good. Um, yeah, a lot of fun.
so yeah, I was like, the character is based on somebody that Eric's wife Alex created, Darla Peterson, and you just kind of like, I don't know, get obsessed with people or fascinated, and you're like, what is that like? What is it like to be in that head? And that's kind of the seeds of it. And we just kind of we wrote two features right in a row. The $1 billion version that would never get made, but then this one specifically with an eye toward making it ourselves. And that's what it is.
So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation about The Exorcist. Please do check out Susie's film if you're interested. I'll leave all of the information down in the description below. Again, her film is playing in Bushwick at the Bushwick Film Festival on October 28th at 8 p.m. and the Downtown LA Film Festival on November 4th at 3:30 p.m. So please do check it out. Please do subscribe to the channel if you found this conversation fun, informative. We'll be doing a lot more cool discussions in the future. Thanks so much. Take care.